At this point, I'm convinced the league doesn't want to have the season because as we go further and further into these negotiations and as we get deeper into what is supposed to be the offseason for the WNBA, we already are well past when we were supposed to have the expansion drafts for both Portland and Toronto. We see the players for the first time start to compromise and the league just not budging at all. Last night, the players gave the league a proposal in which they are showing that they are trying to compromise here and they are trying to get this offseason started and hopefully the season doesn't get delayed or canceled by any means. The biggest thing that the players have been asking for is a larger pot when it comes to the revenue share. They have been hard stuck at around 31%. That has been their main focal point of these CBA negotiations. And last night was the first time they reduced that number down to about 27.5%. That is a big deal because they have been steadfast, not budging when it comes to that 30% number. So the fact that they have lowered it to 27.5%, that's a massive deal. Not to mention they also conceded a bit in the housing department. Players, as it stands, are given housing by the teams that they play for if they don't live in the city that they're playing in. So if someone lives in Texas but they're playing for the LA Sparks will pay for that player's housing. But because of the fact that they're trying to compromise, they're trying to get this done, the players proposed that in the first couple of years of this new CBA, the teams will still be expected to cover the housing, but then by the end of it, in the later years, players that are making close to the max salary, you don't have to pay for their housing anymore. The players will have to pay for it on their own. So in two really massive areas for the players, they are showing that they are trying to compromise. But the league is just not having it, and they keep coming up with numbers talking about how many hundreds of millions of dollars they'd be losing because the WNBPA's new proposal is just completely unrealistic. Every proposal that they've come up with is just completely unrealistic. At first, in December, it was they would be losing $700 million over the course of the CBA if they agreed to the players' terms. Now they're talking about it would be $460 million over the lifetime of the agreement with this new proposal. And I just need to understand how they're coming up with these numbers because they haven't said anything about that, and the players are calling them out on their BS. And that's exactly what this is. This is just the league being stubborn and not wanting to compromise with the players by any means. They don't want to give a bigger revenue share, which, greed, they want the money. But honestly, at this point, if I was the players, a strike just seems like the only way that things are going to get done because negotiating in good faith with the way that things are going right now, clearly the league is not listening, and I want the season to happen. I want to see an offseason. I'm very excited to see where players go because there's so many free agents this year, but it's not worth it if it's going to be this type of negotiations and nothing's going to be seemingly compromised by each side. So a strike seems like the only option really at the moment, and honestly, I'm on the side of the players for that.
A major shock has just hit the world of women's basketball, and that has triggered a wave of speculation that the upcoming WNBA season could now be delayed. For fans who have been following the drama, the tension has been building for months. League executives, team owners, and the players' union have been negotiating several major issues that could reshape the future of the sport. At the center of those discussions are revenue sharing, player compensation, and the league's rapidly growing television deals. The sudden explosion in popularity, driven largely by new stars entering the league, has changed the entire financial landscape. Players believe they deserve a larger share of the revenue now flowing into the sport. Owners, however, argue that long-term sustainability still requires careful financial planning. And when both sides struggle to reach common ground, deadlines start to become extremely important. The March 10th date was reportedly one of those pressure points. According to insiders, the league hoped to finalize scheduling and broadcast logistics before that deadline so teams could move forward with full preseason preparations. But when the date arrived, several key details still had not been resolved. That's when whispers of a possible delay began spreading across league circles. For teams like the Indiana Fever, this uncertainty is particularly frustrating. The franchise has become one of the most talked about teams in professional sports thanks to the arrival of superstar rookie Caitlin Clark and the continued leadership of former Rookie of the Year Aaliyah Boston. Millions of new fans are preparing to watch the league this season. Ticket demand is already rising. Television networks are aggressively competing for broadcast rights. In other words, momentum has never been higher, which is exactly why the possibility of a delay is so concerning. Some analysts believe the league simply needs more time to finalize media contracts and scheduling adjustments. Others fear deeper disagreements may be forming between players and ownership groups, disagreements that could potentially affect the start of the season. League officials have not yet issued a formal announcement confirming a delay, but the missed deadline has raised serious questions about how quickly the remaining issues can be resolved. And in today's sports landscape, timing matters. Every week of uncertainty risks cooling the incredible wave of attention currently surrounding the WNBA, especially at a moment when stars like Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and Breanna Stewart are bringing unprecedented visibility to the game. The next few days could now be critical. If league leaders and player representatives can reach a breakthrough agreement, the season could still move forward largely as planned. But if negotiations stall, the WNBA may be heading toward its most complicated offseason in years. And fans everywhere are now watching closely to see what happens next.
Here's everything you need to know about the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement fight in 3 minutes or less. Start the timer. So this all got started about a week or so ago when the WNBA finally, after weeks and weeks of sitting on their hands, responded to the most recent collective bargaining agreement proposal by the WNBPA. That's the Players Association, that's the union, right? So the WNBA basically said, we're going to move a small percentage point on the revenue sharing, but we are going to move on housing, which is a big issue for the PA because it doesn't just help the largest earners, it actually raises the floor for the lowest earners. It's what a union is supposed to do. And they ended up doing that. They got that concession. So the WNBPA then responds and says, okay, as a show of good faith, we'll bring our number down to 27.5% of the revenue share, and we will make a concession on the housing ourselves, which means that our max players, Nafisa Collier, Asia Wilson, Caitlin Clark, they can afford a house. They don't need it. You don't need to pay for it, but you need to pay for the lowest earners, the developmental players, the hardship contract players, 10-day hardship contract players, the rookies making $80,000 a year trying to make it in New York City and San Francisco and still be close to the team facility. The WNBA responded about 5 hours later and basically said, no, we're not doing it. Their statement said that, oh, we're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars a month over the life of this deal. So this is going to be a non-starter. And now we are effectively back to square one. So what does all this mean? Let me define it for you. So what's important and what you need to know here is the difference between net revenue and gross revenue. Gross revenue is basically profit. It's what you make before you start deducting out expenses and line items and you get to, your baseline level, right? Net revenue is what you make off the front minus the expenses. That final number is your net revenue. In every other league, in the NBA, in the NFL, the players are getting a revenue share of the gross revenue. So what the NFL makes in a year, they are able to audit that amount of money and say, okay, this is what we made. This percentage goes to the players. This percentage goes to the league. In the WNBA, it's very, very different. Inside the WNBA CBA is language that says the WNBA will basically audit itself and then give that audit to the union, and the union will get to decide if the audit looks good or not. They are allowed to see the revenue the league makes, but they are not allowed to see the expenses. If you go into the NBA CBA in the contract language, it is explicitly stated that the audit not only applies to the revenue, it also applies to the expenses, which means the NBA, the men's basketball players, when they go to the table every year with the league, they are able to see how much the league says they are making, but also how much the league says they are losing. The WNBA does not have that, and that is what this fight is over, and why the players are fighting so hard for gross revenue share, and why the league is trying to fight so hard against it and advocate for net revenue share, because a net revenue share is criteria. It effectively means that the league can say, well, we audited ourselves and we made no money, so there's no money for us to share with you at all. But if you don't know the expenses, you don't actually know what it is that what is being expensed here, right? And that's the shell game that the WNBA is playing. Now, the PA is getting to a place here where you're starting to see some cracks, and I fucking hate that for them. Because really, you should be putting this at 20% of gross revenue and just calling it a day and being like, let's sign the papers, roll the ball out, and we're good. That is the magic number, but the league does not want that. And the players, if you read Katie Barnes' article in ESPN, if you read about anything else that is happening within the WNBA, it feels like the factions are starting to emerge, and I hate that, because if you do not get into gross revenue, what are you doing the next time the CBA fight happens? You are doing this fight again. Win gross revenue now, you never fight about it again. That's why the WNBPA is on the edge of making a huge mistake. Do not cave. Hold firm. That's what you need to know in 3 minutes or less. It's 4 minutes, but you stayed here till the end anyway.